Professional Panels Podcast. This is Kristin Arnold, and I am a professional panel moderator on a quest to make all panel discussions lively and informative. This week, we have an amazing guest with us, Tim Woodring. He's with Unbridled. He's the Chief Solutions Officer of Unbridled, which is absolutely the most quintessential corporate event management company, full service, that I have ever experienced. And I'm so happy that Tim is here to join us. Welcome.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and it's been amazing getting connected with your materials, and you are the clear expert in this topic of panels, and people don't talk enough about it, and I can tell you that.
Now, why don't they talk about it a lot?
I think it's a good question. Certainly a good place to start out with. We produce about 400 events a year at Unbridled, varying in sizes from, tens of thousands to 50, and across a wide spectrum of industries and types of events, from pharma to retail, restaurants, financial services, tech, all the above. And panels are something that all of these things have in common. And I think it's because generally, at least my experience, is that people think of panels as kind of the easy option. We'll get a couple subject matter experts together and we'll put them in chairs and it's all going to go swimmingly.
Magic happens.
Yeah. And that's, obviously these are kind of broad generalizations, but at the same time, I'd say that that's somewhat stereotypical of how corporations, associations think of panels. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you've got dynamic people, and certainly, subject matter experts often know a lot about whatever it is that they're speaking about. And maybe they have a lot of experience in panels, and maybe you have a great moderator or facilitator who's helping to lead the charge of someone who's been trained or just has a knack for it. But again, that's not always the case. And I think oftentimes the audience suffers as a result of either the lack of intentionality or design, forethought, all of that.
So your role is as an event producer. And so I'm just curious, what is a Chief Solutions Officer?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a made-up title.
Okay.
I chose it for myself. One of the things I've loved over my years is just the ability, particularly with Unbridled, to kind of navigate it as to where we see our business going and the types of things that we do. So it's probably the most affiliated with a chief strategy officer in terms of my role, particularly within Unbridled. I'm often a part of bringing new services to the table, how we innovate, how we're using technology to augment, enhance our team members to become more productive, more efficient, create better results, be more imaginative, all of that stuff. And that's maybe half of what I do. But the other half is working with our key accounts and working with their executives. It's kind of, I help to generate and catalyze ideas with our corporate clients. And those ideas trickle into all of the deliverables that we do, whether that's speech writing, presentation design, video production, entertainment that we may source, the flow of the event, we call that the kind of the story arc that's happening. And so, a lot of what I do is that work with these executives, with our clients, to help shape their event. That's kind of the other side of the solutions that I help come up with. It's just listening, taking in information, and helping to kind of steer and influence the creation of these events.
That's great. So you're doing solutions for your clients, but also solutions internally for Unbridled, which is how we got connected. Is that Tim and Unbridled are co-sponsors of the 2024 panel report, which we will be introducing at IMEX in just a couple of weeks. So thank you, Tim, and thanks to all the people at Unbridled, because you saw that, particularly at the strategic executive level, there's not a whole lot of conversation about panels, and panels are pretty prevalent in design. So tell us a little bit about how a producer influences the introduction of a panel, the use of a panel, to do or not to do a panel?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say a panel is a part of every event we do outside of incentive trips, I'd say. With some maybe exceptions, but often maybe more particularly in breakouts or things that happen kind of outside of the main stage. I think it's very common, but oftentimes maybe once or twice on the main stage. And some of that depends on industry and style of corporation, et cetera. But I think it's a part of most everything that we do, and probably more so in the pharma space. So how a producer thinks about panels is it's a little bit inevitable, and so
Panels are
we'll start into
inevitable.
panels are inevitable. Yes. We'll start a discovery of sorts with, and I can't speak for all producers, so I'll speak to my experience. We'll start into a discovery, and we're starting with bigger questions normally, or at least attempting to take a step back before taking a step forward, because, I think oftentimes corporations, and I think mistakenly so, begin their planning process by simply copying and pasting what they did the year prior. And we're at least trying to take a step back and say, okay, what's happening right now within your organization? What changes are occurring? What outside forces are at play? What does your audience think, feel, need in this time? And then let's start to map that out against various experiences. And one of those tools in the tool chest, proverbially, is a panel, right? And even within panels, and you can speak to more of this than I can, there are a variety of formats or ways that you can do that. And so it'll generally, unfortunately, oftentimes it starts with some level of hierarchy or need to include executives. I call this kind of the parade of executives, which I think is an unfortunate way of kind of planning out the content for event, but it's common. We'll start with a CEO, maybe vision from there. We'll move into, if it's a sales organization, we'll do maybe the chief sales officer or revenue officer, whatever that may be. And then from there, we're kind of, there becomes this like parade of presenters and oftentimes executives for a corporation. And at some point there becomes this idea that, we need to focus on this bigger topic. So we'll bring these 3 people in. And if that's the case, what are we going to do?
A panel.
We'll do a panel. And so we try and then poke and prod that to make sure, okay, if we're doing a panel, is it going to be interesting, or is it going to be, each person kind of presenting and then some level of kind of placated interaction, and it's, and if it's starting to feel sterile or over engineered, then we'll try and make recommendations, or at least try and change that course to ensure that it's the best experience possible. And sometimes that involves coaching up sometimes that involves encouraging them to think about things. But that's really what led me to your work is, I started to realize, I don't have the right tools to point some of our corporate clients to the best ways to produce a panel, or best practices, or things to help train facilitators, moderators in that process. And, in that searching, it kind of led me to a lot of your materials.
Well, gosh, aren't I lucky? So how does a producer different than the organizer? And what kind of relationship do you have with the organizer, or maybe you would call them the sponsor of the event?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the organizer is most of what we do are corporate events. So it is the corporation. And, our clients vary. Sometimes it's a event manager, project manager, meeting planner. Sometimes it's a director. Sometimes it's a VP. Sometimes, we normally have clients on kind of multiple levels within an organization or the sponsor for an event. And so it kind of varies. My world tends to fall more into the content executive realm than the kind of logistics, realm. And so I'm helping to inform oftentimes things happening on main stage, sometimes in the breakouts as well. But, oftentimes for the breakouts, those get less attention and they get less involvement from the producer. Instead, they the organizing corporation may get questions like, what are your AV needs? And so we say, oh, well, this one's going to be a panel. We need a 16:9 screen, it's going to be sat in theater. It's this many people, And so I think sometimes those just kind of happen without much coaching, alteration, directionalizing, stuff like that. But our relationships with our clients and organizations, it varies based on the client. But, one thing to just kind of point out, this is a relationship industry when you work in events, and we have some of the best clients. And when we get a client, I mean, we have 95% client retention.
Okay.
And so our clients, we make strong bonds with them. And, after like doing events, it's almost like going to war with someone. That's not to discount or make little of like what war actually is. But that's a saying to just say it's kind of like, it feels like that at times. It's very bonding. You're up late, you're dealing with crises in the moment, making snap judgments and stuff like that. So we have strong relationships, and it feels, when it's at its best, it feels like a partnership. And they look to us as experts to help guide them, because what they want the most is to have these events be a success, particularly in the eyes of within their organization, because that often leads to maybe promotion or, at least their job responsibilities seem as satisfactory plus. But then also, most people have a passion for the experience itself and for the audiences in that. And so it's a partnership. We show up to try and help guide them. They're the heroes.
So when would if I'm a meeting organizer or any of those people that you were talking about, and congratulations on your retention rate. That is really, truly admirable. When do I need to have a producer? Like what are some of the things that make me say my event, not just having the panel, but when do I need to really think about having that kind of partnership?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the type of service. We're focused more on kind of a particular format of panels and how those come to bear within events. That's a little bit different. That tends towards more of our creative content and production services than it does our full service offerings, which would also include like group air booking, transportation, hotel sourcing, meeting planning, registration, event technology, web development, a number of other kind of things that kind of fit
full
in.
Service guy, I need
I know,
it
right?
all.
You need it all. You need it all. Well, it makes sense for organizations and corporations to work with third parties and producers, because, it may not make sense for the organization to hire the full-time staff that's needed to produce some of these large events throughout the year. And so they may have a few key staff that manage their events, but most organizations have a larger event or a series of larger events that, that they need this kind of within kind of this hockey stick of time, like increasing amount of expertise and people that can help them produce that. And then it's over, and they may not need that for some time. And so that's why I think corporations work with and hire producers like Unbridled, because they need all of those expertises that come into play for an event. And I think particularly with, our creative and content and production services have, when I started, they were about, I think, 20% of our business mix by revenue. And now it's closer to 40 to 50% of our business mix by revenue. And I think that that's indicative of something that I've seen within corporations and organizations, is that content is king. And that's become evident over the past 20 years. People don't want to sit through 50-minute snore fests of death by PowerPoint. They want experiences. They want, we see this on an economic level too, the move from, more money spent on things to more money spent on experiences. And so I think the same is true with corporations, and they need help in ensuring that those experiences are robust and interesting. And I think that panels can be one of the most interesting forms of content out there if done well. Yes. And maybe you can help the listeners understand what it means to do well.
From your perspective as a producer, Tim, What would
Yes.
you say is a do or a don't when it comes to panels from your perch as a producer, right? You go, okay, because you've seen a ton of panels.
Yeah.
And primarily we're going to be talking about main stage panels, not breakout panels. We're talking, the
Yeah.
full enchilada here.
Yep.
That's a horrible metaphor, but you get it, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah, I love it.
what are some things that you think works really well and what doesn't work?
What doesn't work well, for the most part, these are generalizations, is over-scripting a panel. I think audiences can accept more individualized presentations that are scripted because it speaks to a level of preparation on the presenter's or the organization's behalf, a level of curation around that. And so I think that the audience may give an individual presenter that seems overly rehearsed or scripted more grace to do that. Now, ideally, the same is kind of true on an individual level. The presenter shows up authentic, interesting, has thought through the audience as the audience rather than just something they want to say or information they're trying to put out there. But I think that when it comes to panels, there's less grace for that. If it feels over prepared, over rehearsed, over scripted, then you've taken a format that should present authentically and is grounded in that being a core tenet of degree of interest, and in a sense you've perverted it through that scripting, over preparing, or whatnot. And so I think that is one of the things that I see happen often.
And we did
Is
see that
that
in the panel report, that there's kind of this tension, this balance between being prepared and having some rehearsals, but don't over rehearse and over prepare and have the panel discussion before the actual panel discussion.
yeah. So what makes a good panel, in my experience, is it's an alchemy. It's a mix of a moderator, someone who's helping to facilitate the conversation, who understands what that is. And I think that it's ideal if they don't pretend to be a subject matter expert as well, because they should be playing in part the sense of discovery and guide as a guide, not necessarily as the expert, right? So I think that that's one component of the alchemy recipe. The other is panelists, or at least a panelist that that knows how to make the information accessible to the audience, but then is also sharing with them something that they don't know. I think that that's important. Or the other thing that may be that could, so that's maybe if we're going down more of like an expert thought type route, technical knowledge, whatever that may be. But the other thing is, things that are interesting. And so what are things that are interesting? It could be something you don't know, but it also could be when people think differently about something similar, like a similar topic, but they have different opinions on that. Well, all of a sudden that can be interesting too, because panelist A says, this is how I really think about this thing. And panelist B says, I hear what you're saying, but I disagree. All of a sudden, your audience kind of leans up in their seat and they're like, okay, what's happening here? And I think that corporations tend to shy away from that, unfortunately, because there's risk involved. And but what do they say? Like the apples are on the end of the tree. You got to go to without risk, you don't have that high degree of
Right.
reward. And so I think that those are things, when I've seen great panels, those have been components of it.
I love that. So something that's interesting and something that's new, informative. Brian Walter, I just had him on the last podcast. He's a lovely human being, and he's like, when he asked the panelists, he says, "So does the information make them gasp?" Right?
Right.
Either a
I
good
mean,
gasp, I didn't know, or looks
sure.
interesting. So I think that was a really interesting litmus test of, does it make them gasp? Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, hopefully it's not for the
Yeah.
wrong reasons, right? But like even then, like I think that there's certain level of shock and awe. I did a podcast with Nancy Duarte a while ago now, but she's, I think, one of the best thinkers in terms of just like storytelling and executive presence and presenting. And she said, sometimes when she's giving a talk, she may just almost like gasp or make a loud noise, you know, just to rope people in again, because all of a sudden it's like there's something happening, and I think that, content can be that way too. If all of a sudden you're like, wait, what did they just say? It just takes sometimes, I think, particularly today where attention spans are there's so many things at war for us that provide such quick dopamine hits and, content that we're rewiring to be even less attentive. And so I think that there's tools and tricks, like you're saying, that can help create interest
Well, I do.
to
Right.
enhance the experience.
You're so smart about run of show and the ebb and flow of the components of your events.
Yeah.
Panels are the same way. They've got like many little sections, and the segments have to have an ebb and a flow and something that reels people in periodically because, well, people start drifting. So
Yes.
So
Yes.
what is something that, from your perspective, was particularly memorable that happened on a panel?
We have a client, I don't know that I can tell you their name, but they are one of the premier operators within the DNA space, technology that helps decode DNA. And one of the things that we had done with them was, there was a lot of controversy for things happening in DNA. Particularly if you're on the kind of at the edge of the spear, with the potential for CRISPR to edit DNA sequences. We now know that that's happened in humans. In China, they've been doing it in animals, and there's a lot of controversy over that. For instance, if you could save a child through editing their DNA with a known genetic predisposition and markers, is that ethical to do? And so we produced a panel for them that was more debate style. And we brought in subject matter experts, and we just brought these topics to the table and had them debate them, essentially, and had a facilitator who helped steer and guide that. But it was very interesting, and it was relevant for people. Again, I think that a lot of corporations would shy away from that because, well, what if they say something that's wrong or that's controversial? Or, I think particularly today in the kind of post-Me Too era, executives, my experience at least, is that they're a little scared that they're going to become a soundbite or that they may offend someone. And so I think because of that, organizations have moved even further away from the potential of risk and controversy. But that was one that was probably the most memorable panel that I've been a part of.
I love that because that's about intentionality again. Getting back to that intentionality, you have an objective, you want that controversy, but you want it to be displayed in a respectful and considerate environment. So you, the producer, said, well, why don't we do it like this? And you got somebody who was skilled in the conversation, and good panelists, and then magic can happen. And I think that that's really the part of the joy that probably comes from producing is working with the organizer, the moderator, the panelists. So tell me on a little bit more granular level, what is it that you do with the moderator in preparation and the panelists to help them to execute on your vision?
Yeah. I'll answer that question in a second, but one thing I did want to point out is that, because we are looking at the flow of the event as a whole, we look at both the story and the components of that. We often look at that from a story structure to say what's, the 3-act often structure of kind of what's the setup, what's the, rising interest, and where are we resolving from there. And so part of that is also we look at flow, we look at, but one of them is variety or in this case format. And so, and that's also true with adult learning styles and theory, is that, if you have the same type of delivery across the board, it's less memorable because it's harder to differentiate one thing from the next. That's why, if you have the parade of executives, individual presenters kind of going on the same cadence, eventually you get kind of lulled into this sense of, this isn't new information. My brain's not going to retain it. I'm not going to create new synaptic connections. I'm not going to put any of this in long-term storage. It's why, I love the Maya Angelou quote of, I think it's attributed to her. People aren't going to remember what you say, but they will remember how you make them feel. And so panels are a part of that. In the same sense, you wouldn't want to put 3 panels in a row because it'd be hard to differentiate them. And so we look at things like, okay, well, let's have an individual presenter, and then next let's have, more of an ensemble cast, but it's not intended as a panel. It's, it's kind of more dynamic, and then maybe let's have a panel. And so we're thinking about it in terms of the things that are happening before and after, and as a part of the whole, because these aren't, individual isolated experiences. They're part of a comprehensive and collective experience. So your original question was, how do we work with kind of the moderator and the panelists? It made me think of that because the first thing that we do is we'll walk them through the story arc. We want them to understand what is their part in the play and how are they part of that. That's more critical from main stage than it may be in a breakout where someone is a part of the event, but they may just be operating kind of on some topic, and so like at IMEX, exactly, it's a breakout. Like at IMEX where you sign up kind of more for options of these things and stuff like that. Less critical that that's part of some overarching theme. But if it is, it's mission critical that they understand, how does this relate to other things that are happening? Why are we doing this panel? What are the goals of it? What are the objectives? Why is this the best thing that we can do? That's kind of the first part of it. I'll try and, if I can get individual time with them, then I often will, depending on who they may be, or coach up our clients to do that, or within an organization to kind of help that take place. And we'll also pair with our executive producer as well. So within our organization, we have kind of creative directors, content people, and then we have producers that are more kind of show management and whatnot. And that's a partnership, because I'm listening for some of the words and some of the delivery. They're talking about, how are you getting to stage? How are you addressing this? What type of support might you have? And so partnering with your producers, critical as well, so people understand what they're walking into. It's so helpful for them to have those expectations. But we'll generally I try and keep them to some type of outline. And if panelists are tempted to, or if their working style is to write it out, which for many people it is, maybe half the people that we work with, they want to over prepare often. I'll encourage them to, great, let's take this kind of rudimentary, high level, rough outline, and you can think through your responses in it. I would challenge you to move then from that word for word script and keep reducing it to the point in which you don't need a script, because then they've thought through what they want to say. They've lowered their anxiety through the sense of preparedness, which is a reasonable thing for someone to do. But yet at the same time, they've not done that kind of criminal sin of seeming scripted in the panel, and the lack of expectation around that happening. And so that, it's gonna depend on each individual. Some people, they just wing it, and that can work for some people, in the same way that I've seen people who've prepared a word. I've seen this, and it surprised me at times. They've prepared a word for word script, to it, and they might even put it in the prompter. Let's say there's a prompter in that room, but they don't reference it or look at it, and they deliver it like you never knew. And so it's an individual journey working with panelists, presenters, moderators, and each time you're just trying to figure out, okay, what's your hold on this? What's your experience? What's your comfort? What's your style? How do I move this into the best?
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question for you, Mr. Producer.
Okay.
What do you think about audience engagement in a panel? How, is it a requirement? Engagement, involvement are two different things, by the way.
I mean, we saw this in the data,
Yes.
right? So you can speak to the data.
Well, the data
Uh,
says that audiences are expecting more and more audience engagement and involvement, uh,
exactly.
either
And
before, during, all throughout the panel. So, from a producer's
yeah,
point of view, does that add more complexity? Does it, what's your take on the value add?
yeah, it does add some complexity, especially depending on size. So, for an example, we did an event where we did not pick the technology platform. The client picked the technology platform that they used for the live polling, and it didn't go well. When you have 5,000 plus people kind of hitting one technology at one exact time, you really need a world-class application in order to field that, and also Wi-Fi in the room and connectivity and all this stuff. And so, it ended up working, but the moderator was so scared after the first kind of waiting for those results to come in that they really kind of abandoned ship in that driving the discussion. And so certainly there's the potential for it to go poorly if not executed well. Particularly when technology's at play, I'd say go with the world-class platforms, make sure that you're technically set for that to happen and that you've tested it and that And so at scale, it can be difficult, but it can also be so robust and insightful if you can move it from a didactic delivery into a dynamic conversation, then all of a sudden they're a part of the presentation that's happening or the discussion that's happening. And what better way to rope in your audience or to make it more relevant? And so we encourage our clients and presenters and things like that to think about ways to incorporate that, especially today, where I think it is more expected from the audience. And I think rightfully so. I think that people, I think one of the grand mistakes that happens with corporate events particularly is that, people are on their butt way too much. They leave their house and get in an Uber or drive to the airport to sit in the lobby, to get on an airplane to sit, to get another Uber to sit, to go to a hotel to sit, and we've got to increase the level of interaction and dynamic nature. And that goes beyond panels into experience
Right.
design, breakouts, how we formulate agendas. We keep hearing people want more time with each other. They want more time connecting. So that's another thing I see.
Well, and connection is so important, which is a founding tenet of Unbridled, right?
Yes,
Connect people
indeed.
to the events.
Yes. Connecting companies with
I
their people.
love I
Yep.
love that about Unbridled. Okay, so I want to
Yeah.
shift into this whole omni-channel world. Panels are great face to face. They are great in a virtual world. We see them more and more virtually.
Yep.
How about the hybrid, multi-channel, omni-channel? I think some people are calling it. Like, from a producer's point of view, what do you think?
I think that for the right event, hybrid can be a great gateway type experience to the more robust components of the event, which I think, at least until technology changes dramatically, will continue to be the most robust in person. And so when we were coming out of the pandemic and, I kept reading headlines around the sense of like hybrid is the future and so much confidence in that format becoming ubiquitous and the standard. And I had a lot of question marks. And I think that from what we've heard from our clients, again, we focus on corporate events. And so it's a bit of a mixed message sometimes to say, we want you to attend the event, but, you can attend in these different ways, and I think sometimes people take the more comfortable way, which may not be the best experience. And so from what we've seen from our corporations, they don't have a lot of appetite for hybrid experiences. They want people there. They're investing a lot of money to bring them there, and they want predictability as well, and things like room rates, attrition, stuff like that. And so I think that there's a lot more hype around hybrid than there is utility. I do think that for the right event, a virtual attendance or virtual component of it may be interesting. We see a lot of that as happening more as recording sessions and making them available post show than meaningfully creating interactions with two different audience types in the moment. That's for the most part what we've seen. We have seen some instances, with some of our more global clients where attendance from, let's say, Europe or Asia Pacific, something like that, doesn't necessarily make sense or can be costly, than doing some hybrid where there are attendees in person and a heavy consideration towards attendees remote as well. And those with the right planning, I think that those can be done well. Did that answer your
Yeah.
question?
I mean, I see that specifically in the corporate side. I think
Yeah.
more associations are more embracing the hybrid to just give people access. But I think in the corporate,
Access.
the corporation owns the person's time, and they can say, you need to be here. Where at an
Yeah.
association, it's less likely that you can say that. So I tend to
Yep. Yeah.
agree.
Accessibility is important then, for people, and a lot of those associations have members that need, continuing education credits and stuff like that. And so accessibility, on demandness is paramount. And in some senses like that, like you should really focus on the kind of recorded experience, or the live broadcast experience too, and ensuring that's almost like primary, right? If you have more people attending, let's say, or watching a session after the fact or remotely, you should prioritize that audience,
Right.
maybe over the in the room audience. TED is a great example of this. Particularly, there's kind of like the rise in TED, and we had all of our clients saying, "Oh, we want to do like a TED Talk style," and like, do you understand what that means? Because it's ideas worth sharing, and that's kind of the litmus for it. And what they really meant was that we want to have 15 to 20-minute talks, or like short talks, right? But fine, call it a TED Talk. But when we look at that format as an example, it is a hybrid event. It's normally in theaters, that have kind of tiered seating across the board, and most of the emphasis is on camera shots. They have these really remarkable and amazing camera shots, and they have a whole production kit that you can download online around how they produce a TED event and how that works, particularly for TEDx, where the camera shots are, what their angles are, because it's all about the experience after it. But it's more interesting than having a presenter present in an empty room or exclusively to the camera, because you can sense being in the room by the other people in the room. And so you can look at their faces, you can hear some of their reactions, so it's more interesting because of that. And so I think that's a great example of how either associations or corporations could think of hybrid experiences, in a sense, as like, who's the primary audience? Are they in the room, or are they attending afterwards? Well, how are we syndicating that? And so, yeah.
Yeah. And then you also have the added thing of a remote panelist. So,
Yes.
you've got your 4 live panelists or 3 live panelists, and one is being beamed in, and, so how do you create
Sure.
that space? And that's a production issue.
Yeah.
About how do
Yeah.
you integrate that so it doesn't feel so weird. I'm seeing
Yes.
a rise of the remote panelist as well.
I think it's a great way to bring in, whether that's subject matter experts or celebrities, someone for kind of a small thing. And it's definitely a production challenge, but we've done a lot of that. We've done some of that. Most of it probably that is truly live, and then some of it that looks like it's live that you wouldn't know, but it's pre-recorded, because who knows? You'd never know.
Who knows? Well, Tim, this has been really interesting. Is there a question that you thought I was going to ask that I didn't ask, or anything that you think our listeners might want to know about producing panels?
I would just leave maybe a piece of advice for whomever may be listening, is that influence and authority are different things, and that anyone can influence and help a panel to get better by learning the components of how to produce good panels, looking at the research, practicing themselves, etc., and that you can be a part of influencing that wherever it may be, through recommendations, through asking questions, through offering advice, whether it's your job to or not. And that's the difference in maybe the authority that might take place, because I think that my hope would be, and I know that this is kind of, in a sense, your purpose and mission in being a thought leader in this space, is that we would get more often, more frequently, panels that are more interesting. And so I think it's going to take a lot of people learning how that works and influencing that process. And then hopefully we get better results and things land better and people are inspired in new ways and come off of it feeling like that was a success and I want to do that again.
Well, Tim, I'm so glad that you have joined me on the quest for all panel discussions to be lively, informative. They're powerful panels. I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Thank you, listeners, for listening in, tuning in, watching. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. We've got lots of resources on powerfulpanels.com. And we'll see you next week here on the podcast. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you.